Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Do we have the presentation up? Oh, lovely. I don't have my speaker notes, so you are going to get a very relaxed version of this talk. I hope that will be okay. Something I noticed up there, it says fun and serious. Now in the UK, which is where I'm from, nobody ever says that kind of thing. They don't say fun and serious as a title. So I was sitting there thinking about it, and I like the way that in different languages, people use other languages in a very interesting way. And I realized this is actually the subject of my talk, that fun is serious, and that we don't take fun seriously enough, that we push fun to one side as if it was unimportant, as if the only thing that mattered was work. And my whole talk is about how the industry we're in, and how many of you are video game developers? Good, lovely. So if you're developing video games, I want you to know you're in one of the most important industries in the world. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in the industry and have been for a long time. It is genuinely something that is going to help people massively, much more than we realize. So Reasons to Be Cheerful was a song by Ian Dury and the Blockheads from a very, very long time ago. I suspect nobody is old enough to remember it. But we have many reasons to be cheerful in the video games industry. And I'm going to take you back through a history of about 40 years. Ancient. Anyone over 40? Actually, don't put your hand up, because that'll be embarrassing, right? So this is where I started. 1982, the Atari 400. Does anyone recognize this? You over there having a conversation, do you recognize this machine? Yes, you too. Do you remember it? No, you don't. You weren't old enough when it came out. You're just saying that. Anyone actually remembers one of these machines? They're so primitive. This is an 8-bit machine. So this is when I started. This is my first machine, 1982. And the world at that time wasn't ready for video games. Knew nothing about video games. These were seen as just a curiosity by the older people. So the previous generation, they just thought they were like fun, pastime. Kids went to arcades to play games. It was not a big deal. There was no industry. Industry didn't exist. It was just something that kids did that was a bit fun, a bit like a hobby, a fashion, and everyone thought it was going to go out of style. But for me, I thought there is something here that nobody understands. Very few people understood. Certainly the older generation didn't understand. And I began to teach myself how to program. Now, 1982 was a different planet. Okay, not a different time, a different planet. I'm going to try and explain it to you as briefly as I can. This is a Polaroid camera. These are ironically cool now. They were not ironically cool in 1982. They were just cool because that's what we had for instant photography. To actually develop photos in 1982, we had these tiny little pocket cameras. Maybe we still have them today. You took them to a chemist, and after 2 days, you got your photos back, right? That was our Photoshop. So we didn't have computers either. We didn't even have them in the offices. If you went into an office, you know what it looked like? Mad Men. Have you ever watched Mad Men? Right, you have typists in one part of the office, and the other part, you just got big desks with paper on. So computers weren't in the home, they weren't in the offices. We didn't have mobile phones, never mind smartphones. We didn't have CD players, never mind streaming. And we didn't have the World Wide Web, so we went there, libraries. And sadly, we don't have too many of those anymore either. But this is how we got our information in 1982. We didn't have GPS. At least there was no consumer GPS. It was still very much a military thing. And we still had dial-up phones. So there were no mobile phones back then of any kind. In fact, we didn't even have caller ID, so you couldn't find out who was a person who just called you. And we didn't have flat-screen TVs. We didn't have satellite. We didn't have cable. We didn't even have TV at nighttime. So this is a very different world I'm describing, 1982, practically a different planet. And all the while, my father, who was separated from me and my mother, he told my mother that I was wasting my life. I was 16 years old, and I was wasting my life because I wasn't going to school. He said, all he's doing is making monkeys dance on the screen. That's what he said 40 years ago. Now I call my newsletter Dancing Monkeys in his memory. So that was the world at that time. Now, I knew this. I knew that I wasn't going to go back to school, and I knew I was never going to give this up. So 12 years passed. Now we're in 1994. Yes, you just got rickrolled. And here we have two more monkeys dancing on the screen, except these monkeys are multi-millionaires. So they're very happy. This game, Donkey Kong Country, sold over 9 million copies. So suddenly, what's happening is this is becoming an industry. This game generates over $250 million in revenue. And you're needing bigger and bigger teams to make games. And what happens is when this amount of money is generated, when culture is becoming defined by this new medium, when people like Sony are entering the fray, remember this is 1994, so what happens in 1994 is PlayStation joined the fold. PlayStation is cool. We have culture. But what happens when you have culture, and when you have culture that makes a ton of money and it's new, is it starts to get attacked. And so this is a time in the early to mid-90s, it had been happening for a while, but certainly at this time, there was a sentiment among politicians and media figures that video games were causing gun violence. There was a sentiment that playing violent video games caused youngsters to go out and kill other people. That was a sentiment. Now, in the video games industry, we were shocked because we thought it was fun to play video games. We didn't think what we were doing was harming anybody. So it came as a shock. So the industry started to set up bodies to try and protect the industry and the consumers. So it was in the guise of consumer protection. And we had to start learning fast because we needed a response to this attack. So, how did we respond? Before I answer that, I'm going to take you very quickly through a history. I'm going to go backwards in time through a history of what we now call moral panic. TikTok is an obvious example. Nowadays, many parents are worried that their children are spending too much time on TikTok. Who has TikTok on their phone? It's great, isn't it? It's great. It's absolutely great. How can you consider... I don't have it on my phone, but I'm an addict, right? So it's okay. If I go on TikTok, 2 hours is gone, right? The thing about TikTok is you can learn anything you want from it. When I started in '82, there was nobody to learn from, nothing to learn from. There were no mentors because that field didn't even exist. It started around that time. Now, if I want to learn something quickly, let's say, for example, I wanted to learn how to breakdance. Would you like to see a 56-year-old breakdance here? Yes? Good, so would I. I can't do it. But if I wanted to, I could learn it from TikTok and come back next year and be 57 and breakdance, if I wanted to. Then I'd more likely break my neck. My point is, the kids today are able to absorb information because this is a world that they've grown up in. And when I say kids, I'm talking about people far younger than you. Have you seen kids operate with technology? It's like they were born with it. And what we're seeing is the older generation are attacking this because they don't understand it. Is this a new thing? Is attacking the younger generation's interests and hobbies and fascinations and passions a new thing? Well, let's go backwards in time a bit more. In 1994 in the UK, we unbelievably passed an act that banned loud emission of a succession of repetitive beats. Basically, four to the floor, as they call it. That got banned, played loudly in the UK in 1994. It's law. But I tell you what else makes that sound? What else makes that sound? Should we stop that as well? Yeah? How about these people? Should we stop the Sufi whirling dervishes? Because these people, what are they doing? Anyone know what they're doing? Have you ever seen them spinning round and round and round? They're getting into a trance. They're dancing to a rhythm, an internal rhythm. They're going round and round and round, and eventually they go into a trance state. Interesting. Maybe people don't like other people going into a trance state, which is interesting because a trance state is actually higher consciousness, not the lower consciousness that we're being accused of. So look at this. Dancing, drumming, swaying, it's completely out. But the interesting thing is that this rhythm is actually essential to life, and it's what makes us feel safe. Where does this come from? Where does the idea that rhythm in a trance state make us feel safe come from? Anyone have an idea? Take a guess. It's all right, take a pause. We've got loads of time. I'll finish quickly. Excellent. Clearly, I will give this man some money later for saving my butt. So, from the womb, because the only time in your life all of your needs are met perfectly without you having to do anything, when you feel completely safe, is when you're in the womb. And what is the sound that you hear? The heartbeat, the mother's heartbeat. You hear it constantly. That is what you are programmed to associate safety with from a very young age. Interesting, huh? So, doom. This was attacked in 1994 because the shooters at Columbine mentioned that they played Doom. But then they also went to the bathroom, they also presumably brushed their teeth, they also put their clothes on, they also ate maybe Cheerios for breakfast. My point being that correlation and causation are not the same thing. They could have been doing a bundle of things, and this is just part of the culture. If you go a little further back in history, heavy metal was blamed as well for creating satanic impulses in the youth. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think these guys create satanic anything in anyone. And one of them's even wearing a cross. This is Black Sabbath, in case anyone doesn't recognize them. They're not in their best state over here, and it's debatable whether they were ever in their best state. D&D. I only recently started playing D&D. Anyone here play D&D? Good show of hands. I'm 56. Only a few months ago I started playing for the first time. And I loved it. Do you see any horns growing in my head? No, and there's a reason for that. It's because playing D&D doesn't turn you into Satan. But when the game came out, there were plenty of people in politics and in media saying that playing D&D was associated with Satan worship, with demonic impulses, with child abuse, and with suicidal ideation. This is unbelievable. Anyone who looks at the facts will see that to jump to such conclusions, how could anyone give these conclusions any credence? But they did, again and again and again. Further back, this is one of the most famous punk bands of all, if not the most famous. This is the Sex Pistols, who in their famous song, God Save the Queen, wrote, "We are the flowers in your dustbin." For me, this is one of the most moving lines in any song in history. Why? Because what were they saying? They were young. They were saying, we are the flowers. The youth are the flowers in the dustbin of us old people. And that's what we do. Year after year, generation after generation, we take the dreams of the youth, of our youth, and we throw them in the dustbin. We get old and boring and sententious and patronizing, and we put the flower of our own youth in the dustbin because, hey, got to make a living, scared of the new. But does that mean that the youth is wrong? No, the youth is a check on the old. The youth is always a check on the old. Progress always comes from the youth. Heck, even the greatest quantum physicists of all time, the people who invented quantum mechanics, were in their late teens and early 20s. Sure, some of the older physicists helped them finish off their work. Who doesn't? Which parent hasn't tidied up after their kids, right? But the kids create magic. I can't create some of the Lego creations my kids create. Let's go back even further, 1976. Can you believe Death Race was said to be a game that inspired violence? Can you tell the difference between the player character and the vehicle? I can't. And I drew pixels for a living. So my point is this, even the king. If we go back through history, we will see that there has always been moral panic, and it doesn't apply exclusively to video games. Elvis Presley, the king himself, what do you think he was accused of? He's accused of having moves that were a bit too passion-arousing. I wonder what he would have made of Cardi B, for example. So these things, my point is, these things have happened throughout history. We didn't start the fire. It's always been burning since the world's been turning. Yes, I made that song up. Yes, that's me. I'm Billy Joel. So my point is, we're okay. We're okay. We didn't cause this problem. There's always been this tension between the new and the old, between the young and the old. And we need the young. We need that innovation and creativity. So, fine, good. We didn't cause the problems. We are not responsible for violence. Plenty of studies and meta-studies have now demonstrated this time and time again. What do we know now? And what can we do about it? COVID-19 changed everything. And to this day, we are still learning the lessons of what it's taught us. The reason we feel like it's a period that we haven't acknowledged yet is because we haven't. It's going to take years to process what happened. But one of the interesting things that happened through this period, apart from people loving Animal Crossing, was that we all started to ask the question, because we were confused and we didn't know what to do and who to trust. We asked the question, what does the science say? This is the first time in history where we all, well, not in history, but I would say certainly in secular history, that we started to turn to what we considered a priestly class, the scientists. Now, the scientists themselves will tell you, we don't work like that. We don't give you 100%. We just give you our latest data and our opinions on that data. But we had nothing else, so we said, what does the science say? So perhaps we should ask the question, what does the science say about video games? Well, this is interesting. There's a multiplayer co-op game study done about smoking, which apparently reduced cravings by 50%. I should try that, actually. So the interesting thing about this is that the same receptors in the brain responsible for nicotine are also responsible for the hit that you get from problem solving in a co-op space. Who knew? So instead of sparking up, you play a co-op problem solving game and your cravings go down. Incredible. This, for me, is one of the most powerful studies of all. This is the Burn Center at the University of Washington. So they played this VR game set in a snow world, and their sensation of pain was reduced by over 90% while they were playing the game. And incredibly, even after they stopped playing the game, the intensity of their pain reduced by 50%. If you had these results from drugs, the drugs would be given to everyone. They'd be the greatest success in history. You might have noticed nowadays that with drugs, there is the idea that you get a huge percentage reduction in risk. And the way this is often spun is that reduction is actually a relative reduction. The absolute reduction in risk is very small. We are talking huge absolute numbers with video games of real therapeutic benefit. You might be familiar with the Oxford study. Now, the Oxford study was about PTSD. And what they did is they showed distressing images to people, and then they got to play Tetris immediately afterwards. And the people who played Tetris, their flashbacks were reduced by 50%. 50%! That's colossal. There's no other treatment on earth that can do this. And one of my favorite is that kids who were given a handheld video game to play just before they went into an operating theater reduced their anxiety by over 90%. In some cases, all anxiety had gone. Well, I mean, we can see clearly why, right? They're doing something cool, they're completely distracted, they're absorbed in this thing, but it worked better than anything else. And post-operation, the video games helped them recover faster with fewer pain-killing meds, which is incredible. So I waited a long, long time for this day to come, 40 years for this day to come. I just wish my father was still alive to see that monkeys dancing on a screen can heal people. Here's a nice representative family photo I wanted to share with you. The reason I wanted to show you a family photo is I want to give you a very quick example of the power of video games in the young. So I'm going to use the example of my eldest daughter, who's grown up now. When she was young, I was obsessed with Super Mario 64. I know, way, way before most people's time here. But I was obsessed with it. And one night I got up like 3 o'clock in the morning because I dreamt of a solution to a particularly difficult puzzle. So I went to the Nintendo 64 and I started playing, and my daughter, who was very young at the time, came and joined me. And I don't like to swear in front of my kids. And I thought in my dream I saw the solution, but I couldn't solve the puzzle. And so my daughter's sitting behind me, so I said quite aggressively, but without swearing, "I'm going to hit Mario." And I just carried on playing. And about 15 seconds later, I heard my daughter crying quietly. I turned round, "What's the matter, sweetie pie? What's wrong?" And she said, "Papa, I don't want you to hit Mario." Wow. Wow. Remember, this is a long time ago, right? Mid-90s. Mid-90s. This is the power of video games. Completely invested in this character, having feelings of protectiveness towards this character. That's the young. I don't know. I started video games when I was in my teens. It's not in my blood. The new technology is in the blood of the youngsters. It's probably in all of your blood. It's natural to you, like breathing. And it's a beautiful thing. And we're now learning that it's absolutely essential to our well-being. Yes, it's healing. Play is healing. This is the beauty of play. We can demonstrate that now. This is why when Mike Wilson, who's one of the co-founders of Devolver, when he set up Deepwell with Ryan Douglas, who's a genius from the medical devices world, and when they set out to create a company that hopefully will help Dr. McGonagall's dream come to life, I said yes immediately. I absolutely had to say yes. So my point is this: if you're a developer, then you're the future of the most important industry, in my opinion, for the next few decades. Because we have a mental health crisis. And video games help people through these. We still have a lot to learn. Don't get me wrong. It's not like you can just make any old video game and suddenly mental health is cured. It's going to be $1 trillion space. And if we're not careful, it will be entirely occupied by medicines that are questionable in their efficacy. But if we step in, we step up to the plate, we know what we do helps people feel better. We know what we do helps people connect. And so what you're doing is important. And nothing makes me happier. Thank you. So I still got a few more minutes. Questions, I guess? Any questions? Are we doing questions or no?
If you want to, yes.
So up to you. Yep. Your show.
Si tenéis too have one.
Okay.
Shahid, I've been following your career for a while now. I didn't discover you through the Code is Just thread on Twitter, but it was an inspiring read. And I read all the anecdotes from when you were started as a developer. You are back to developing again, right? So can you tell us a little bit of how it felt to get back, to getting your hands dirty with the code and designing and so forth after all this year? Because the industry has changed quite a lot. I don't need to tell you more about that. So I guess it's been a different experience.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Okay, when I started, the ground was quite level. So in the early 80s, it was a very level ground. Anyone could get in, learn something, release something, and pretty much any kind of game would make some kind of money, right? But there were still very high-quality games that were the exceptions and that made a lot of money. You know, the whole 80-20 thing in video games is never 80-20. It's more like 99.9.1. Yeah, that's the law of video games, taking Pareto and stretching it to the extreme. Now, guess what? It's no different. Yes, if you look at the competition, more people have access to game-making tools. All that does, it allows more people to enter the fold. That's great. But it also means that your starting point has to be higher. You can't just say, make something that can easily be made by anyone and hope to be a massive success. So I understand that, but that was also true at the beginning. That's not changed. The effort required to stand out, to become amazing, to be recognized, that has never changed. It takes a long time. I mean, yes, I started in '82. I started to sell some games within a year of my start, but it wasn't until 1984, so 2 years of non-stop hard work, before I got a serious gig. And when I started again, in back end of 2015, it wasn't until 2017, again, that I got something serious. It takes time. You have to be prepared to invest in your field, in your career, in your own personal development. And that means it might be that if you're young, it's going to take time before you make money. Don't have these unrealistic ideas of how easy it is to make a video game. Yes, it's easy to make a video game. So what? It's easy to make music. It's easy for me to pull out my phone. I'd say it's in my pocket, but it's in my bag. Pull it out, do a TikTok. Am I going to become a TikTok sensation? No. But those people who have practiced, who understand how virality works, who use interesting production techniques or just a completely new quirk, or have an amazing personality that they worked years developing, they're the ones who are going to be successful, right? The same is true of any field. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? It's always going to take work, but there's always hope, and there'll always be a new platform to hit, a new device, a new bottom end, a new place to start. We're just lifting that start so that it's easy for people to begin.
Hi. How do you think the different platforms that video games can be played now can be affecting the industry and the audience?
Sorry, I don't understand the question. How do I think the different platforms can
The
what?
new ones that are launching, for example, for computer, how all of these are making the industry both higher level than before?
Yeah, I'm still not sure I'm getting it.
Okay, so you were mentioning at the beginning how video games started.
Yeah.
And the first consoles, so the market was more limited in a way. And now we have way more consoles, way more computer platforms that we can be playing games. How is it going to be evolving the audience that it's going to be reaching out?
Well, I'm still not sure I understand, but I'm going to try and answer it anyway. So for example, nowadays you have modern tools that allow you to hit many platforms at the same time. And many developers can do that. I mean, as a solo developer myself, I can easily, using Unity or Unreal, hit 5, 6 platforms, no problem at all. In the early days, there were lots of platforms. It wasn't just the Atari 400. There was the Texas Instruments 99. There was the VIC-20. There was the Spectrum shortly after I got this. There was the ZX81 before that. There was the Acorn Electron, the Acorn Model B. There was the Apple II. There were a lot of platforms, and it was way harder because you had to program them in assembler, and they all had different assemblers. Some had 6502, some had Z80, some had 6809, and so on. So I think, if anything, it's easier today than it was then to hit more platforms. I think we've got time for one more.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Buon dia a todo. Thank you very much for the speech. It was very interesting and very straightforward. And talking about the history from the 90s is for sure very interesting. It was a very important generation from the 8-bit, 16-bit, 64-bit, and the PS2 Dreamcast era. I wanted to discuss about remake and remaster. When you started in 1992,
82.
Yeah, 82, sorry. I'm pretty sure that the production of a game was around 18 months to maybe 2 years maximum. Now we have a remake on games like on Final Fantasy VII, which are production of more than 10 years. What do you think that there is still fun to make serious game where basically you were basically working on a game where you had to produce content for people with a lot of fun, and now you have to make sure that you have to create narrative, choreography, voiceover together. Do you think that it's still fun?
Yes.
Thank you.
You want me to expand?
Yeah, for sure.
I'll try and keep it brief. So, were there bad jobs back in the early 80s? Yes. You could. I knew some guy who would just take code from one platform and convert it to, say, 6502 and convert it to Z80. And he would do that. Every month he'd do a new game. Every month he'd get another $3,000. And I thought, wow, 36 grand a year, that's a lot of money. But I couldn't do that. I'd die of boredom, right? There's no joy, there's no creativity. But actually, he must have got his own kind of joy from it, his own sense of creativity. And now it's a case of, well, you could be working on a video game for a very long time, so you could say, I'm a very small part of this enormous production. But then one day you will always have, I worked on Final Fantasy VII on your CV. That is one hell of a thing to put on your CV, right? Or you could say, well, I left this big AAA publisher to set up an indie. I left, for example, Electronic Arts. And I left with 3 of my friends, and we set up an indie. What was that developer called? That developer was called Hello Games. They then made Joe Danger, which was a little indie game, but they were informed by their AAA experience. Sean Murray was actually running development at Criterion, which is part of EA, so he was working on the Burnout series as well. Was it Burnout? Yeah, 2 or, not sure if it was 3. Anyway, after Joe Danger, of course, they did No Man's Sky, which is a 9-digit success. Yeah? So they're still working crazy hard, but they're now more in control of their destiny. These are extreme examples, but there are many others that fit anywhere in that continuum. Choose your point. Choose whether you want to be independent. That means you run the high risk of not working on something that will be very famous, but you have complete control, and you have maybe a bit more happiness. Or you go and study with some of the best people in the world, and accept that you will only be a small part of something big, or anywhere in between. There's room for everyone's dreams in this industry. And you go and have a look at the jobs that are listed now as available. It's crazy. People are looking for a lot of good people right now. So if this is something that you want to do, and you're not yet doing it, video games is a great place to be.